Welcome to Still with Purpose. This is Amanda and Christy.
Our goal is to dig deep and discuss real, raw subjects in pursuit of greater self-awareness, positive transformation, and healing, and to link arms and journey with you as we discover purpose and passion in life together.
Before we jump in, we'd like to ask if Still with Purpose has ever helped you feel seen, encouraged you to heal, helped you to breathe a little deeper, think differently, or reminded you that you're not alone. Please take a moment to follow the show, leave a review, and share this episode with someone you believe would get great value from it.
That simple act helps this message reach more humans, and we are so grateful for every single one of you walking this journey with us. We're so glad you're here. Let's get into today's conversation.
Hey, welcome back, everyone. We are on our next episode of our series called Answered Prayers, and I am so excited to have our next guest. Her name's Nicole Kroger, and she's actually the wife of my pastor. They're both pastors. I'm so excited to have her because the goal of this series is to really talk about what God has done in people's lives, the miracles, and how you got to the other side of the challenges and the trauma and the drama and all the stuff. And we're very clear that that has to do with Jesus. And I'm just getting bolder in my walk of not hiding that anymore. So thank you so much for coming on, Nicole. And we're excited to have a little chat with you.
I'm excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
So she's from Colorado as well. Obviously, if I go to her church, she's in my home state. And we are going to interview her husband as well. But they're two phenomenal stories and they come together as a couple and it's really powerful. But one of the reasons I wanted to interview you guys is because you come from the place of the elephant in the room is what I call it. And I highly respect, since we're both pastors' kids, we've seen it all in the church. And to me, it's really important to be a part of a community that's calling out the elephant in the room instead of having a tremendous setback and pulpit failure because there was no accountability and it was just straight humanness that took over the person, because we all know we sinned. So welcome.
Thanks.
I mean, you've shared your testimony before, so I guess I'll just let you lead, girl.
Yeah. So, so much happened in the span of about 10 years. And sometimes when I'm telling my testimony, it's hard to remember exactly when this happened, before this happened, and then this happened, because in the messiness of the way my life was unfolding, there's just a lot. But I was born in New York and my parents were alcoholics, my mom and dad. So those formative years, I don't remember a whole lot, but there was a lot of dysfunction. My mom and my dad both were involved in AA. So I remember as a kid going to AA meetings. I thought it was very normal. It was what I did. So I thought this is what kids do. We hang out in a basement and everybody's smoking cigarettes and, somebody goes up to the front and shares something. And I was in the back coloring. So that was a very normal thing for me as a kid. When I was about 6 or 7, we moved to Connecticut. And somewhere in elementary school, my parents got saved. My mom had a stillborn baby after me. And I think that was kind of her rock bottom. And so my parents, that's how they got introduced to the Lord. And my parents really tried hard to get their life on track. Coming from alcoholism and addiction, they kind of swung to the extreme of God is someone to be feared. And so what was instilled in me as a child is God is watching you and you need to make sure you stay in line. So my concept of who God was not very accurate. His heart for me, my understanding of his love for me wasn't really there. And the other thing that was a little bit confusing for me growing up was we went to church and we did a lot of church things, the youth group and get-togethers and stuff like that. But the Jesus that I heard about at church wasn't in my home. There was a lot of anger and a lot of violence and not a lot of Jesus. So all that to say, my perception of God was not accurate. I was just pretty scared of God and I didn't think he wanted anything to do with me. So that kind of sets the stage for some of the decisions that I made. So forward to high school, I meet this person, and he has a very charismatic personality, very charming, very funny. We were immediate friends, and we didn't start dating until college. We were just kind of on different sides of the tracks, and in high school, that was really important for some reason. So we started hanging out in college, and at that point in my life, I would call that my self-destruction phase. So drinking, doing drugs, not very aware of myself, not taking care of myself, just kind of living in total rebellion, running pretty far away from God and anything that had to do with God, and was just pretty self-destructive.
But you didn't really choose God for yourself at that point.
No.
Okay.
I had, like I said, been invited to things,
Hmm.
to youth group. I went on a mission trip when I was in high school, and there were periods of time that I was curious, but my understanding of God was not right, because it was very fear-based. So I felt a lot of shame for the things that I was doing, and I didn't feel like God could love me. So, met my husband, and we partied together. When I was 20, I found out that I was pregnant, and I was a sophomore in college. I was going to school to be a teacher, and I knew that I was not ready to be a mom. I had always known my whole life that I wanted to be a mother, but I also knew that I had a lot of work to do. I was aware of the dysfunction in my family from a very young age, and I knew that it wasn't healthy. And if I wanted to be a parent, I knew I had a lot of things that I needed to work through. So I was really unsure what I was going to do. And I remember I went to Planned Parenthood because that's what was on my college campus. And they gave me brochures, and I looked at them, and I didn't know what to do. And that was the beginning of me feeling this call back to the Lord, because my life was starting to crumble right then. So I looked at the brochures, and I decided I'm going to have this baby, but I'm not sure what I want to do when the baby comes. Adoption was very much on the table. During that time, my father died very suddenly. He had a brain aneurysm. And my dad was, out of my family, the most stable person in my home. He was the most emotionally stable, but he worked a lot. So I didn't get to see him as much as I wanted to. He traveled internationally and things like that. So my dad died, find out I'm pregnant, and I start journaling, and my journals were prayers. My journals were to God. Even though I didn't really have a relationship with him, I knew to cry out to him, if that makes sense. So, leaving out a whole bunch of details from that time, which was 1998, for the next 7 or 8 years, my daughter Aubrey was born, then my daughter Kate was born, and Chris and I were living together. We got married in 1999, and his addiction really took off. So in my brain, I thought this charming, charismatic, lovely person who is an addict, once we get married, he's really going to settle down, and he's going to be a responsible father, because that's what happens when you get married. Not really understanding that addiction doesn't work that way, and neither does alcoholism. I think maybe I knew deep down, but I wasn't acknowledging it. I was just kind of walking in, some optimism, I guess. Over the next 7 or 8 years, Chris's addiction went from bad to really bad, to where he wasn't coming home at night, draining our bank account, cars were repossessed, we were evicted, we were homeless.
With two babies?
Two babies. Yeah. So everything that you might think that you see in the movies of people that have addiction. So, interventions where we would come together and talk to Chris about the problem. All of those things happened. Ran out of money, had no place to live, with 2 kids in tow, all of those things that happened with addiction happened with us because the addiction was greater than as much as he wanted to be a good father.
Right.
Yeah. So that was a really, really dark time, really, really difficult. In 2003, I started going to Al-Anon, and that's where I started to get some support. I came in and said, "Hey, my life is totally bananas and I need support." And so Al-Anon was kind of my first step towards getting some help. And I brought my kids with me, and they went into Alateen, even though they were really, really young, but they remember. I started seeing a really great Christian counselor, and she was walking with me through it. And there was one day, this is kind of the turning point of my testimony. So this was in 2003. It was in October, and I was driving down the road, and there was a big church, and it was a Calvary church, but it was a mega church, big church, which I was really turned off by church and big churches especially. I just felt like they were filled with hypocrites, and I was not interested in being a part of any of that.
Hmm.
But I was really desperate. So I'm driving down the street and I see a sign outside, and the sign says Hope for the Separated. And it was a group that met at the church. So I pulled my car in and I wrote down some information, and the group met in the basement of a church. And so one night I asked my mom if she would watch my girls for me, and they were probably, I don't know, maybe like 2 and 5 at the time. And I walked into the basement of this church for the group called Hope for the Separated. And I just said, "I need hope. My life is a total mess." And these people really came around me. The 3 things that they said to me, well, first they asked me if I had a Bible, and I said, "No, I don't have a Bible." So they put their money together, and we got in the car and we drove to the Christian bookstore, and they bought me a study Bible, and I still have it. I should have brought it with me. And the study Bible was really awesome because I had never really for myself opened my Bible. I had only just sat in church very passively with a hard heart and a chip on my shoulder, but I had never opened up God's word. So they said to me, "Nicole, you need to pray for your marriage. You need to pray for your husband, and you need to read your Bible." And those 3 things were kind of like my marching orders. And so I did that. I just started reading my Bible, and I prayed for Chris, and I prayed for my marriage, and I journaled a lot. And I journaled all through this whole journey. And when I look back, what I was journaling a lot of at the beginning was a lot of hurt, and bringing to the Lord all of the hurt, the lies from my husband and all of that, the things from my childhood. I was just kind of pouring that out to the Lord. And through that time, God was speaking to me through his word. And I was writing down things that I didn't really understand because I didn't have a foundation, but I was reading Isaiah, don't know anything about it. And I come to this verse that says that I'm going to make a way in the wilderness, and I'm going to put a river in the wasteland, and I'm going to do something new. And so I would write it down, and I would put a date by it. And I'd say, "Okay, Lord, I'm going to just cling to that." And then I would be in another part of scripture, and it would say, like, "Forget the former things." And I would say, "Okay." And I would write that down. So for the period of time from 2003 to 2007, I started going to Celebrate Recovery. I had an amazing Christian counselor that was helping me work through a lot of the hurt. I was going to Al-Anon. But the most important thing was this Hope for the Separated, because Hope for the Separated was all people that were living on their own, separated from their husband, with different things happening in their life. I didn't explain what the group was, but Hope for the Separated was people who were separated.
Oh, interesting. Never heard of a group like that.
Yeah, and honestly, it was just at this church. I don't think it was a national thing. I just think think it was this group at this church, and it was a leader and probably like 5 or 6 of us.
Pretty powerful.
And
They
how cool that you stumbled upon it right then. No doubt God led you there, right?
absolutely, and they discipled me. They really discipled me
And when did you choose out of active addiction?
when I got pregnant.
Okay, I was gonna guess that, but
What I discovered and what I've learned is that I wasn't an addict because when there was something in my life that presented, I need to be responsible, I could stop.
okay.
Chris could not.
Yeah.
While I was at Hope for the Separated and I was at Celebrate Recovery, I came home one night and I put my kids to bed. And I was living in this little apartment and I put my girls to bed and I walked into the kitchen. I remember I sat on the floor and I asked the Lord to be my savior. It was a very simple prayer, but it was, here's all of my mess. Here's everything that I've done. And he just welcomed me and said, I see you and I'm here and I'm going to walk with you through this. And that was in October of 2003. And nothing in my life changed per se. I didn't have any more money. My husband was not sober. I had hope for the first time. And I was not alone for the first time.
Awesome.
Yeah. For 4 years, I just kind of stumbled my way through very early Christianity and really had to fight that urge to run away from church because part of me still battled with the feeling of feeling judged.
Yeah.
I was a single mother and my life was a mess. And I struggled with being really honest about that without feeling like people were judging me. So I found safety in Celebrate Recovery and I found safety in Hope for the Separated because those were people like me.
Yeah.
That was kind of where I stayed. I didn't do like women's Bible study or anything like that.
Yeah.
That was way too much. And then during that time, Chris's addiction was really, really bad.
Did he know you accepted God?
Yeah. I started telling him I'm bringing the girls to church.
Okay.
And he would say to me, it's all smoke and mirrors. It's a sham. And he made fun of me a lot. I remember there was a Christian bookstore and it had the book by Lee Strobel called A Case for Christ. And I would give it to him or like leave it different places. And Chris finally like handed me the book and he's like, I'm never going to read this. So stop trying to get me to read it. And we were playing the game of like, he would be home for a little bit and be sober, and then something would happen and he would leave, and then he'd come home and then he would leave. Like that kind of thing happened a whole bunch. But for 4 years, we were not really together.
Okay.
And most people in my life told me to get a divorce because it was looking pretty bleak. I even had people give me money to get a lawyer. And I did. I went and saw a lawyer and I drew up divorce papers. And I was so young in my faith, I really had a hard time discerning, is this God's voice or is this me? And so every single day I would lay the divorce papers on Chris's side of the bed and I would kneel down on his side of the bed. And my prayer was, if it is your will, Lord, help me let him go. Because the thing that's hard is I loved him even through all of this. I did. I loved him. I mean, it's hard to explain, but I always saw that Chris had more than how he was showing up in life.
That's always why we stay.
Yeah. And I prayed that and I wrote it in my journal where I just said, when it's the time, Lord, show me. And he never did. And I just kept doing my life. I kept walking forward and Chris was back here, but I wouldn't divorce him because God didn't tell me to. So yeah, I prayed for him and I prayed for us and prayed for my girls and we prayed for him. And I learned in Al-Anon to talk to my kids about what was happening. So they were totally aware. I mean, there were times that we all visited him in treatment. And they prayed for him. They saw what was happening with his life, and we just prayed for him.
Were you feeling resentment towards his non-acceptance or like making fun of, against all your efforts? Were you starting to feel resentment towards him, or were you just
I
leaving it
think
to God?
I think I felt sad for him because I knew what it was like to feel that way. And I knew what it was like to feel how I was feeling. I was scared for his life because he was a drug addict. He wasn't just an alcoholic. He was doing hard drugs and going to Chicago to get them and making a lot of really dangerous choices. So I think more than anything, I was scared. I was
Yeah.
scared he was going to die. And when I didn't hear from him, I can just remember thinking my kids are going to grow up without a dad. Yeah. So in July of 2007, a friend of mine was getting engaged and I wanted to be there for the engagement. And so this was a period of time that Chris was sober because he would go to treatment and he would get out and be sober for periods of time.
Yeah.
If you are an addict and you don't have the Lord, it just kind of draws you back. And so at that time, he wasn't fully sober, I guess I should say. So he had the girls, and I went to this engagement, and it was up in Wisconsin. We were living in Illinois at the time. And while I was up there, I couldn't get a hold of him. And I knew it was happening again. And he had brought the girls to his parents' house and he had left. And I left the engagement and I drove home, and I remember it was like a 3-hour drive. And I kept saying in my head, I'm done. I can't do this anymore. I'm finished. I can't do it.
Yeah.
And I actually wrote in my journal, and it was the last entry. It was July 6th. And I said, I can't keep hoping for a miracle. I can't do this anymore. He's hurting me and he's hurting the girls, and he's not going to change. Lord, I give him to you. I can't hold on any longer. And Chris had gone to Chicago and he bought all the drugs that he could to OD because Chris decided he didn't want to do it anymore. He decided he didn't want to live anymore. And so he put himself in a hotel room, and for 3 or 4 days, no one could get a hold of him. His goal was to just kill himself. And for those 4 days or 5 days or whatever it was where we couldn't get a hold of him, I thought for sure that this was it. And his parents didn't know where he was. None of his friends knew where he was, because what Chris did most of the time when his addiction was calling is he disappeared. He didn't do it in front of me. He didn't do it in front of the girls. He did it alone. And when Chris tells the story, he gives a lot more detail, but he woke up after several days and all of his drugs were gone and all of his money was gone and he was still alive. And he said he looked at himself in the mirror and he was like, just in disbelief, I can't believe this is my life. I can't believe that I have done this. And he said, Jesus, if you're real, I need you to save me. And that was the moment that he cried out to the Lord. And he's been sober since then, which will be 20 years next July. But
Can I
that
just point out too that today is July 6th, by the way? Wow. Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Wow. Yeah, tomorrow's 19 years.
So your prayer on the 6th was, God, I give him to you. I release it all. Do you feel like up until that point you thought maybe you could help and you could do something, but that was when you truly just let it go?
I think I struggled with that the whole time because I was a codependent, raised in a home of, my parents were alcoholics who got sober, but that dysfunction was still there. And so I tried to manipulate things, to say things, to convince Chris, to change myself, to do something different. I did it all to try to get him to be sober.
Yeah.
And some days I was like, okay, I'm done. I can't do it anymore. And then other days I was calling him and begging him. And
Yeah.
it's
It's maddening.
it was all of that. But
Yeah.
the journal entry was, I'm done.
Wait, so we're recording this on the same day?
Yeah.
Yeah. Cool.
Profound.
Yes.
Well, that's
That
a
is
little too much.
Yeah.
It's wild.
It's wild. So July 7th is, we call it Chris's sobriety anniversary. Sobriety
That's so Chris.
anniversary. So it's his sobriety anniversary, but it was the beginning of our family being restored. And it was the first day of a long road of recovery.
Sure.
A lot of things had to happen between then and now. And like we've said, sometimes it's really hard to tell my story because I know that there are so many people that have different outcomes and different ways that their story has unfolded. And my story is not Nicole prayed for me, and so God answered yes because she prayed so fervently. That's not it. I was praying and seeking the Lord and desperate to hear from him. And through my time in prayer, God was ministering to my brokenness.
Yeah.
And he had a calling on Chris's life that the Lord had decided that for his glory, because he knew that he was going to use Chris to do what Chris is doing, to minister to people and to share hope. So through my desperation of praying, God was healing me.
Yeah.
Talking about it makes it feel like it was probably a short time period, but I know you're saying it was years, and you probably felt like your story could end very differently many times.
Yeah, I mean, there were times that I was super discouraged. There were times I was really depressed. There were times I was so sick of my life because I was that person. I was always that person who was crying all the time, my car would break down and I had no way to fix it. I needed to sleep on somebody's couch because we had no money. That was me.
The ego death of a lifetime.
Oh man, was it ever? And I just felt like I'm so tired of being this girl.
Mm-hmm.
Like I got pregnant and then my dad died and then my husband's an addict and all of this stuff. I felt like when I walked in a room, I was just a mess all the time. But I think through that, like one, God was giving me a heart for so many people because I see someone walk into church like that.
Mm-hmm.
I am drawn to them. And sometimes I have to be careful to not be like, I get it. I understand. It's okay. You can be here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we've talked about this before about how I met you guys, but it was pretty much in a park. They were having a church service. I went to a mega church and I wasn't looking to leave my mega church. I was very comfortable and I could be a number, but we just met. They came up to me and were saying hi because they thought I went to their church. Meanwhile, I have just went through the biggest loss of my life with an alcoholic. He didn't choose to do the work and get help or honestly to fight for me at all. And Nicole and I have talked about this before, is the number one question when you give your testimony is, well, what about me? And I can tell you honestly, when I heard Chris on the stage at that park, I was like, oh, brother, like, are you kidding me? Not only does he look like my ex, but also he's from Chicago. There was just too much.
Yeah.
I was so triggered and I was so unbelieving because I didn't get the redemption story of a lifetime. What do you think that is? My personal opinion is you have to absolutely choose it for yourself because you're the one that has to do the work.
Yeah. I think it is one, we're not going to understand all that God does.
Yeah.
Because his ways are higher. And there are lots of times that I don't understand why he works the way he does.
Yeah.
Like Chris was kind of talking about over the weekend, sometimes he chooses to heal. And sometimes he doesn't. And I don't understand that.
Yeah.
I am so humbled and grateful. And I can't even put words to how thankful I am that he saved my husband and our marriage. And it's so hard sometimes to hear from people that is not their story. And I think that's more common.
Right.
I think more often than not, addicts struggle their whole life, or they don't ever get sober, or they die. And that was a very, very real possibility that Chris was going to die. That, like I said, that was my biggest fear.
Yeah.
But the Lord, in his goodness and in his wisdom, and that he's sovereign and he sees all, he chose differently for us. And I think that's why we will never stop telling people about him. And we will never stop sharing hope because he is the God of the impossible. And even if your story is the person that you loved didn't get sober, he can still do that same work in your heart.
Yeah.
Because in my story, in those 4 years, what he was doing in that time was he was putting me back together. He was healing my heart and healing my brokenness. And I was learning to trust him. And I was learning to discern his voice. And I was learning his word. And all of those things God was doing in me way before Chris got sober. And if he would have had a different outcome, I would have still pursued God.
Yeah. So it's just such a beautiful testimony of stop judging. You
Yeah,
have your own sin.
yeah,
Focus on
exactly.
yourself and just love people the best that you can without just being horrifically ruined by them.
Totally. And I think it's so good, Amanda, because when people hear my story or they hear your story, it's so easy to judge Chris because his sins are all outward.
Yep.
Everybody can see them. My sins were all in here.
Yep.
And they were just as detrimental because my sin was the bitterness, the unforgiveness, the fear, the not trusting. All of those things were keeping me stuck.
Yep.
That's what God had to unravel in my heart so that when Chris did finally come to the end of himself and God had been working, there was some hope for us.
Yeah, you weren't the bitter wife
Exactly.
that you're never going to change.
That was still in there. There had to be trust rebuilt and all of those things, but we had an amazing Christian counselor and we have, continued to have mentors and people pour into our lives and be really open and transparent so that the enemy can't get a foothold in any of those places anymore.
Yeah.
And it's that you waited to make sure God wasn't calling you to move forward with divorce. This whole aspect, and we heard it with Felty, which was another answered prayers episode that we did, just waiting on God until we are sure what he wants us to do, I think is just so important.
Totally.
Can you imagine how your story would be different if you made that decision on your own?
Yeah. And I got the papers. I still have them. I just, like I said, was trying to discern God's voice, to hear him clearly, to know which way to move.
Yeah. But ultimately, as we always say on this podcast, it all comes down to, am I in integrity before God
Yeah.
on my decisions? And no one can make that for you.
Totally. Yeah.
So one of my biggest questions when I talked to you originally was, what do you do when you're in the moment and you're praying for the person and you're waiting and all the unanswered prayers? How do you keep going? Or how did you keep going?
Well, I think that one of the things that God was teaching me in the waiting was this deep work that he was doing in my heart that I feel like could only be done in those difficulties. And I think it had a lot to do with learning to trust him and his character, drawing me into a deeper dependence on the Lord, and understanding that there are going to be lots of things that I don't get, but knowing that God is good. And sometimes my definition of good and the way I want things to play out are very different than the way God sees things, but he's good
Mhm.
and I'm not. And so I think it's developing that dependence on him and endurance and hope and perseverance, right? In Romans 5, that's what it talks about, that in the trial, that's what he wants to do in the waiting and in the not knowing, is developing all of those things in our hearts and in our lives that can only be developed in the difficulties, in the waiting, in the unknown. So that deep work had to happen in that time in my heart.
Yeah, you've said that alcoholism is so blatant and in your face and so easy to see. And one thing that was super convicting for me as well as I went through my healing
Yeah.
was realizing this is between me and God on what I chose chose. And my sin's no dirtier than, or if not dirtier, because it's a type of manipulation too,
Yep.
of me trying to get my way and wanting what I want. But my biggest find was that I've chosen men that have these blatant sins so that I don't have to work on me.
For sure. Yeah, I think there's so much truth in that because, Chris's sins were on the outside. Everybody could see them. His addiction, his alcoholism, his, not using money the right way, all of that, everybody could see. And it was really easy to judge that he was
Mhm.
way far. But all of the ugly sin in my heart, people couldn't necessarily see bitterness, judgment, resentment, self-righteousness, all of those things the Lord was doing in my heart through the coming to him on my face. And as I humbled myself and said, my life is a mess and I'm broken and there's nothing I can do, the Lord in his grace and mercy and love was revealing those things to me as I sat with him in prayer and like wrestled some of that stuff out. And it's really hard to look at it and it's really ugly, but it's so necessary because we couldn't come together as a couple without that deep work that he wanted to do in my heart. And that's where the trusting and the depending on him, that's where it all happens. It happens in secret. The Bible talks about that secret place that we have with the Lord and that he's our refuge and we can go to him. But it also is a place where God exposes. If our heart is, Lord, show me that wickedness in my heart, if you pray that, he's
Yeah.
faithful to show you. Yeah.
That's like praying for patience.
Yeah.
Here
He's
you go.
Yeah. And so many times people are like, wow, I can't believe you hung in there. You're so whatever. And it's,
Yeah.
well, honestly, I was just putting one foot in front of the other and having the Lord show me for that day what I needed to do. And my eyes needed to be completely fixed on him and not on Chris and not on my circumstances, but just on what God wanted to do in me, for
And it
sure.
might have looked like to outsiders that God wasn't doing anything. Like people might say, where is God? But now, looking back, and probably knew then, he was actually very hard at work and doing a major change in your life.
Yeah, I've been kind of into reading some poetry lately, and I read a poem a couple months ago, and it talked about how when a seed is planted, it's in the dark,
Yeah.
right? And it needs to grow roots and a stem and all of those things in the dark. And so for 4 years, when Chris and I were not really together, kind of on again, off again, it seemed like God wasn't moving because nothing changed. I was still, a single mom. I still was struggling financially. My life on the outside looked exactly the same. I was waking up and going to bed and everything was the same. He was doing deep work in me. There was just no fruit, but fruit takes a while to grow. And I
Yeah.
think what happens is we get super discouraged because we're like, well, I prayed and God didn't move like that. And it's like, but that's why it says he's developing endurance. He's developing that patient endurance, that hope, that steadfastness. And that comes sometimes in just waiting and trusting that God knows. Yeah.
It's also knowing the stories in the Bible. This is where the frustration comes in for me, is I know stories in the Bible that are hundreds of years or 40 years in the desert or
Right.
100 years waiting to get pregnant, whatever the
Yes.
story is. That's the part I think that makes us a little skittish and want what we want now. Even though if you would have jumped the gun and pushed through your agenda, like we all have,
Yeah.
it ends up really missing a huge piece of the healing journey.
Yeah, there are so many examples of that in the Bible, right? Like Joseph waited. Moses, for 40 years, God was developing him to be a leader, but for 40 years, he's in the wilderness. When Hannah is praying, we know the end of the story, but when she goes to the Lord and she is weeping and she is crying, and the priest thinks she's drunk, it's because she's in that process of not knowing how her story is going to turn out yet.
Yeah. So what would you tell people that are in the middle right now? Like, what encouragement would you give them?
That God sees you, that he knows you, that he is there with you, that he loves you, and that we just need to remain in that place and allow him to comfort you. Our job is to remain, and he does everything else, and don't give up. And our story may not turn out the way we want it to, but God is still good, and he still loves you and sees you and knows you, even if your story doesn't turn out exactly the way you want.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah.
I would say also that we aren't that creative. So what we want
Yeah,
is probably 10% of what God could actually create
totally.
for us, if we're willing to wait. And it is the trust walk of a lifetime. It's the ego bust of a lifetime. And yet all that needs to be done in order to have the character that you guys needed to cultivate to lead a church.
Yeah.
How cool is that?
I know I'm thinking about you today, Amanda, and I was like, look at what God has done with your pain. You have a podcast now that you're
hmm
using because ultimately it's to bring him glory, right? That's
Yeah.
the whole purpose. I mean, he's going to do work in us, but it's to bring him glory. And that's what you're doing through the stuff that you've gone through. And that's the way your story is being written.
Yeah.
Nicole said it earlier, God's ways are higher. He knows all. He's looking out for everyone, not just us and the people that we come in contact, but the world, the universe at large. And so we have no way of even thinking through what might be the best outcome, but he knows.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And there are lots of times that we won't know the answer. We won't have our why. And I think that's where the trust really comes in. When my dad died suddenly and my brother became a drug addict who's still battling addiction, I could be stuck in the why did you take my dad? Why at 45 did he die of a brain aneurysm?
Yeah.
And I could spend so much energy and time trying to figure that out. Or I could say, I don't know why, but I know that you are good.
Mm.
And I know that you have a plan, and I don't have to understand it. It says that he doesn't always give us understanding, but he gives us peace that surpasses understanding. So I have peace knowing that I'm in God's hands, and that's enough.
Yeah.
Absolutely. In our family, and Amanda knows this, we had a death earlier this year. My daughter's best friend at 15 years old. And so many people were asking why,
Yeah.
just God, why? But the thing I always come back to is God knows why. And there was a reason, even if we don't get it. And that's the piece that we have to settle into.
Yeah. And sometimes that why is we live in a fallen world and there is evil and death and corruption. And God is going to make all things new in his time.
Right.
And we have heaven to look forward to.
And talking about the timetable, for us, it seems like an eternity when we're waiting on God. But for God, it's nothing. And his world, his kingdom is going to be for all eternity,
Exactly.
for the rest of time.
Yep.
It's hard for us to even fathom that. But I often try to remember that when I get frustrated, things aren't happening on the timetable I think they should.
For sure. Totally.
I was thinking of the difference is I had a very close relationship with God, and my path was totally different. I chose a man that would speak to my crappy core belief of I'm not worth sticking around for. So, of course, I'm going to sign up for an alcoholic. Of course, that fits perfectly. Someone that was going to choose a bottle over me.
Yep.
And I got to be right about that. So, we talk about this a lot on the podcast is I'm here exactly today because of all my choices.
For sure. Yes.
So that's a very horrible statement. And at the same time, it's so empowering because I can say, and now I choose to not sign up for that. Or now I choose to hold people capable. And now I choose to hold Jesus capable. So it just was really cool timing for me to run into you guys too, because it triggered such a healing process for me to not go into judgment against every alcoholic in America. I think just hearing your story, Nicole, makes me think like you can't fake a relationship with Jesus because you wouldn't have that much grace and humble consideration for your own sin. I think if it was not a real take on that you actually really chosen, you actually could be extremely bitter in trying to push through a not so great marriage.
And there are definitely times I feel like the enemy tries to bring back to life things that are dead. And
Absolutely.
for me, it's shame or discouragement or trying to bring up past hurts.
Hmm.
That person is dead and she is no longer alive. I've been born again, but it's not like I have amnesia. You
Yeah.
know, I lived that life. And
Well,
so
it's cellular. It's on a cellular level.
yeah, so there are times that I still have to remind myself, and that's why it's so important to be in the Word because the Word is what renews our mind
Yeah. And community,
and
for sure.
for sure. Yeah,
Nicole, I appreciate you saying that because it really is a death of the person that we were before God changed us. And when we say change, it was a total change of heart, total change of interests and goals and, all the things completely changed.
yeah.
So we can't hold ourselves to the shame and the regret and the pain that we had when we were the old person.
Totally. I feel like God has me on this journey right now of understanding grace on a deeper level because grace is unearned. It's just a gift. And for people like me who've made a lot of really bad decisions, I feel like grace is something that I need to keep coming back to because I lived my life. I know all the decisions I made. I know all the mistakes I made, but God gives us that mercy and He gives us grace. And that's why it's so incredible because we are made new.
And there's nothing that we can do to earn it, right? He freely gives it and we have to freely accept it. But that's hard for our brains to comprehend, especially the world that we live in. Everything costs something and you do something, you get rewarded, but that's not the same with God.
Yeah. So I've been into poetry lately. I feel like it's just putting into words thoughts and feelings of my heart. And it's just beautiful. So this is a book by Tanner Olson called Continue. And the name of the poem is For When You Forget. And it says, For when you forget, He is still Lord over all. He is still listening when we pray. He is still holding all things together. His mercies are still new every morning. He is still for you. He is still forgiving. He still says, Come to me. His tomb is still open and empty. The light is still breaking through the darkness. He is still calling us beloved. He is still giving us rest. He is still inviting us to cast our anxieties on Him, to love our neighbors as ourselves. He is still our strength when we are weak. He is still removing our sins as far as the east is from the west. He is still good. He is still sending us. He is still with us. He is still the beginning and the end, and He is still coming again.
It's
Love it.
beautiful.
So I feel so blessed to have you on here. And just for everyone listening, we are going to hear Chris's story as well. And they're so powerful separately that I wanted to do two different podcasts on this. But thank you so much for spending your time with us on this journey and what God's done for you. It's really powerful.
Yeah, thank you, Nicole. This was really inspirational.
Amen. Thanks for having me, guys. My prayer before was just that whoever the Lord would want to hear this to bring hope.
Yeah.
That is my prayer.
Thanks so much for joining us today. We know your time is valuable and we're truly grateful you spent part of it with us. We hope this conversation stays with you and helps you move through the week with more clarity, peace, and purpose.
Be sure to visit us at StillWithPurpose.com. And there you can read our bios, sign up for email encouragement and updates on exciting announcements, and also join our Facebook community.
And if Still With Purpose has encouraged you in any way, please remember to follow, leave a quick review, and share with a friend. It helps more people find these conversations. Have a phenomenal week, and we'll see you next time.